Welcome everyone. It's a treat to have you back at our dialogues on leading in complex times. Certainly no lack of complexity, and hopefully over the past few weeks, it feels more and more manageable to actually be a leader in these times. Today we have the privilege to have with us Peter Fisk, who is, among many other things, but the managing director of Thinkers 50. He is the director of the Global Advanced Management Program at IE. He is a great thought leader on a number of topics. One of my favorite books, Peter, is the one you wrote a decade ago on planet, profits, and purpose, and people, sorry. And you started to uncover and unveil the importance of actually managing more holistically, right? And now it looks like you're back at it again with business recoding and really thinking differently about how business can, of course, make profits, but in a different way. And so we thought it'd be really, important that at this times of uncertainty and complexity, that we actually pause a bit and think about what has made certain businesses so successful when they actually can put purpose at the core of it. And so anyway, welcome to our dialogues. It's always a treat to see you and listen to you. And if for all the audience, if you're all okay, what I thought we may do is listen to Peter Fisk for 20-30 minutes, and then we can have a debate. I have some really hard questions prepared for you, Peter. So, but I'm sure the audience will have a few. So welcome, and the floor is yours, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. I'm looking forward to your hard questions. So welcome everybody. I think we have around 153 people online. So wherever you are in the world, welcome. I hope you're safe and healthy and are surviving these difficult times, but also taking maybe a few moments to connect with people who you haven't for some time, read a few books, and to think a little bit, as well as all the crazy things going on around us. So what I wanted to do in the next 20 minutes is really to just have a little talk about how I see businesses surviving, but also being able to thrive in these crazy times right now. And in particular, as Teresa said, to talk about purpose. So, you know, we're in the midst of this downturn, crisis, which you could call it. And, you know, I just want to start off with that Chinese word, which you may have read about, or maybe you're actually Chinese yourself. And the Chinese word is wei ye. And wei ye is actually made up of two words. One is wei, which is danger, and the other is ye, which is opportunity. And it's kind of quite nice that you know, our Chinese friends combine those two ideas, danger and opportunity, into the same word, because, you know, a crisis really is a scary time. It's a time when we're fearful, but it also is a time when everything changes. And, you know, for me, I've worked through a number of crises in business from the 1990s through to 2000, 2008. And each time you've seen the world kind of accelerate out of that time of change. So there's no getting over, you need to survive the change first of all, which means putting people first and health first. And from a business financial point of view, it means putting cash first so that you survive. But it also means saying, how do you find your way through this time of change? And, you know, perhaps it's not any surprise in some ways when you look at previous crises, that if you look at the Fortune 500 today, you know, 57% of the companies who are in the Fortune 500 were actually founded during a downturn. So that's companies like Apple and Microsoft, who were founded at a time when people were shifting towards a more automated way of doing things, and they were acting more remotely, like we are today. Or it might be in times when people have much less money after the world wars, when McDonald's, for example, they entered the market with their super speedy fryers, which led to what we now know as fast food. And if you take it much more recently, in 2008, 2009, during the economic crisis, which probably most of us remember, then we had many of the unicorns who we see today. So they're those billion-dollar valued, or they were billion-dollar valued companies. So I'm thinking particularly of companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Uber, Square. All of those were founded during the crisis of 2008 to 2009 and have gone over the last decade to create over $500 billion worth of value. So there's something about downturns and times of crisis which force us to think differently, force us to kind of look forwards rather than looking backwards, and to change what we do. And I think, when we're thinking about this crisis and you're thinking as a leader of your business, well, what do you do? Well, the first thing, obviously, is you need to survive, as we said, which means retain cash. It means minimize your expenditure wherever possible and sustain some forms of revenue. So finding out what those sustainable forms of revenue are. So, finding ways in which you can get through certainly the first 6 months. And there are some companies who are actually thriving right now. Companies like Instacart, for example, in America, who's become the #1 fresh food shopping delivery service, and have just recruited or trying to recruit 300,000 new employees right now. Or obviously Zoom, for example, the video conference service, which Eric Yuan created. Zoom's quite different. We're using Zoom today. What's interesting about Zoom is I can sit behind a beautiful waterfall, which I can't do on WebEx. And what Eric Yuan did was he tried to make Zoom something which was much easier to use and much more human at the same time, so that people would adopt it in a slightly different way than there are the technical WebEx and other forms of video conferencing. And his share price has tripled in just 3 months. So maybe all those cocktail parties which we have at the end of the day online are actually fueling somebody's future growth. So survive is the first thing. Second thing is to adapt. So adapting means moving forward in new ways. So it might be doing certain parts of your business. Maybe it's shifting your core in some way. So if you take a company like Adobe, during the last economic downturn, Adobe took the moment to take products like Photoshop from being product software which you buy to software which is on demand and you pay a subscription for. So it moved to the cloud, it moved from service to services on demand. So, times when you change your business model, you change the format which you deliver things, and you might actually reach out to new types of customers who are using it, like Zoom, for the first time. And then the third part, once you've started to adapt your business, is to look, how can you go further forwards? How can you thrive, if you like, in this new world, which is really about reimagining things. So how do you see that future world? We can talk more about that a bit later. But how do you see your industry over the coming years? And how can you use this crisis, this moment when customers or consumers are reevaluating what matters to them, when they form new relationships, they form new loyalties? And how can you use that moment to actually introduce new ideas, accelerate your innovation, and move to new places as an organization? So survive, adapt, and thrive are, for me, the 3 phases of thinking for a business leader as they work their way through this difficult time. And I think if you look around us right now, you see industries which are changing incredibly quickly. So if you look at the healthcare industry, for example, look at all of the work going on collaboratively around the world. 35 pharmaceutical companies working together with Zoom conferences 3 times per day, I'm told, working on trying to find a vaccine, coordinated out of Finland, actually, where governments are aggregating their support to these 35 pharma companies in the search for a vaccine, and actually working together believe it or not, to actually try to find the way out of this crisis in many senses. 46 companies beyond that are working on antiviral drugs, so they are the ones which will help you recover much faster. And actually the leader in antiviral drugs for COVID-19 at the moment is quite a surprising company. It's Fujifilm. And you probably remember Fujifilm as, you know, alongside Kodak, putting that film in that camera film into your cameras in the day when they were analog, and being able to take photographs. And Fujifilm over the last 20 years has transformed itself because it was experts in terms of making camera film, which were very thin materials. It was actually able to use that cellulose-based material to start to develop cosmetics because it was the same originating material, and from cosmetics move into healthcare. So it found its way to move forwards by evolving its capabilities and finding a new sense of direction. So I think healthcare in all senses, and particularly digital healthcare, so being able to talk to your doctor online right now, like on a smartphone, 95% of all doctor consultations now across the world are done through smartphone. 3 months ago, it was around about 5%, according to Babylon Health. So we can see that huge adoption of digital platforms, which existed for the last 10 years now, you could say, but being able to go to your smartphone, being able to use artificially intelligence-enabled diagnostics to be able to work out what is your problem, that will tell you, do you need to talk to have a consultation with a doctor, and then being able to talk to the doctor within 24 hours. And I certainly know that if I want to see a doctor in face-to-face, it normally takes 2 to 3 weeks these days. So rapidly transforming the patient or the consumer's experience by using technology. And we almost just needed that nudge. We needed that crisis to get to the point where we adopt things in a new way. And if you look at that much more in large scale, you see a company like Good Doctor, which is the world's largest healthcare platform. Good Doctor is actually one of the applications of Ping An. Now, Ping An, if you're familiar with them, is one of the 10 largest companies in the world now, a Chinese company, which until 7 years ago was purely an insurance company. And then what it did was it said, I have this technology platform, I have this financial plumbing, if you like, in base. What can I do rather than just manage people's money? How can I add value to their lives in some better way? And it chose healthcare as the first application or category which it wanted to move into. So using its technology background, using its financial foundation to say, how can we do more? And so now 300 million people, almost all of them in China, 300 million people subscribe monthly to Good Doctor as their primary source of medical advice. And Good Doctor is an ecosystem which brings together pharmacists, doctors, hospitals, so physical hospitals as well. So it is a fantastic ecosystem focused on healthcare. So you can see how the shift towards these new ways of working, and we could go on about, you know, remote working and how that's changing, remote education, and how that's driving us, not just to kind of have the same kind of lesson we would have in the classroom, but, you know, kids really adopting a peer-to-peer approach to learning, which is much better than just being taught at. And they learn to teach each other, they work together at the same time as being facilitated by a teacher online. So we see all these examples of industries which I think will change quite rapidly. The question, I guess, for you as a business person is to say, well, what's going to happen to my industry? How do I find my way forwards? And that's really where purpose comes in. And many people say, you know, finding purpose is a nice thing to do. It's coming up with one of those statements which you put above your door as you walk into work, which used to say, we want to be the greatest company in the telecoms industry. We want to be the greatest healthcare company in the world. But instead of it saying that, a purpose statement really is about what you will do for the world, what you will do for other people, how you add value to society, why you exist for the world, or why would the world be a lesser place if you didn't exist? So finding a purpose has been something which people have talked about for quite a while now. But it's really about being able to turn that inward looking approach to how your company can be the best at what it does, to saying, how can you do your best in some way, in some relevant way for the world? And I think finding purpose now, even if you haven't thought about it before, finding it now in the midst of a downturn, when you're thinking, what's going to happen? What do I do? Where do I go? What does my business actually exist for? Becomes much more motivating, but also much more guiding to your business going forwards. So it gives you direction. It gives you a sense of purpose in terms of where you're going. That helps you to make new decisions about what kind of things you should be doing and should not be doing. So if you're asked to develop ventilators for hospitals, or you're asked to help in some way, does that actually fit with what you're doing, or does it not fit with what you're doing? So what is this purpose? What's this new direction? A bit like Fujifilm, which you find yourself going in. So I think finding purpose is really important. It's also quite energizing. You know, it's tough to get up in the morning and keep working, particularly at the moment. But you know, getting up in the morning just thinking I want to make somebody else rich is not as motivating as getting up in the morning and saying I want to make the world better in some way. So purpose is all about saying, how do you make the world better in some way? We'll come back to that in a moment. I think the second thing, which is important as a business leader right now, is to think about how can you accelerate your purpose. So accelerate the activities which you do. So think about innovation and think about maybe it's moving to digital platforms, maybe it's moving to new business models, for example. Maybe it's about using new partners in different ways as we become remote in terms of our work. Can we actually learn to use partners much, much more? And the third part, which I think is really important, is leadership. So now more than ever, we need business leaders not have their heads down, control going, can it's more helpful. And ultimately, this crazy time, how can you help your customers through this difficult time? How can you help society through this difficult time? But also then having resilience and strength to give people hope and to give them a bit of optimism in terms of there will be an end and there will be a way through this, and there's a reason why we're going to keep going. So I think those are the three things which really matter as a business person right now. But let's come back to purpose, because that's what we really wanted to talk about for a little bit today. So, you know, if you look at the examples of companies, so, you know, I was looking around for some companies who are really using purpose at the moment. Tesla, for example. Tesla has a purpose statement which says, we're here to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. And if you look at it, Tesla is actually the only car company in the world, and car companies I know are having a really bad time at the moment. It's the only car company who's actually selling more cars right now than it has done at any time in its history. And partly that's because people see that Tesla have some fantastic features, such as it has a fantastic bio-defense system, which will protect you from almost any types of materials which can come from the outside into the car, the filter system on the car, but also primarily because it's future-proofed. In the sense that we know that it will work in a world which is transforming towards electric and in a world the automated world Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm just going to check you can still hear me.
Hello, Peter. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, let's continue. So Tesla's a great example of a purpose, that shift towards sustainable energy. Starbucks, for example, its purpose is to inspire the human spirit. So what does it do? It says, well, let's become the third place. Let's become a place where people can meet. Let's become a place where actual community action can be centered from. And so Starbucks really uses that purpose statement of inspire the human spirit to lift itself up about just being a coffee company or a coffee shop. Or think about Dove, the soap and the skincare business from Unilever. Dove has a fantastic purpose statement as a brand to say we're here to help the next generation of women to realize their potential. So both in terms of its products, but also in terms of its other activities at the same time, how can it help young women to realize their potential? And if we look at some of the statistics, we see that purposeful companies, these companies who really take that bigger idea, and then they say, it's not just some kind of nice statement, but it changes the way we work. It changes the decisions we make. It changes the products and services which we innovate. It changes the way in which we support our customers. Those companies which have a more purposeful approach to their business typically outperform the market by around 42%, which is phenomenal. That's based on a 10-year analysis of companies on the Fortune 500. But what's also interesting is that customers prefer buying from these companies. So 66% of customers across 22 different nations said we prefer companies who do something more. They deliver the product, they deliver all the functional benefits, but they do more at the same time. And that figure actually went up to 92%, from 66 to 92%, when you ask millennials, would you choose a more purposeful brand or company to buy from? And what's also interesting is that 70% of people said that they would pay more for a purposeful company. When asked how much more, the average figure was around 35% more for something which does good for society or environment at the same time. So I think that's great examples in terms of why a purposeful company can actually be more profitable at the same time as being more purposeful. From an employee perspective, employees in 2.5 times better innovation comes from a purposeful company. 70% of employees prefer to work for a company which has meaning beyond making money. And the retention level goes up to 90% more particularly for young people, if they find meaning in their work. And $20 trillion of investment today are under ethical investment, if you like. So going into sustainable funds, which are benefiting businesses, which benefit the society or the environment through what they do. So this, in a sense, is a great kind of moment when we see purpose coming to the fore. Still, businesses are there and they make profits, but they make profits for a bigger reason. They can make profit and they can do good for the world at the same time. And what's great about that is it drives them further forward in a much more meaningful way. So I think purpose is something really to think about right now, whether you're a business leader or whether you're working on a particular product or a particular innovation, you're a marketer and you think about how do you communicate your brand, whatever it is in your business, then think about how can purpose be a much more driving force, aligning force, and energizing force to help us through a time where everything seems a bit crazy and we perhaps lose a little bit of faith in things, but also helps us to take us to a better place afterwards. So I'm going to stop there. That's 24 minutes and open it up to questions. And Teresa, I'm sure you've got a few questions to start with, but then also anybody else, please submit your questions online.
Thank you, Peter. That was very inspiring, and I love all the data behind how purposeful companies actually do perform better. Let me start with, I said I was going to ask a few hard ones, and I'm going to pick actually on some of the ones that are on the chat. First, let's actually talk about, it's just a clarifying or definition issue. Why purpose now? I know in your book you make the distinction between purpose, mission, vision. We've all been hearing, about purpose for the last, whatever, number of years. Why purpose now? And what's the difference between this all, the mission and vision? Why do they answer different questions? And then we'll go to the purpose now. But is this not a fad, or is this,
Good question. So let's talk about the difference between mission and vision and purpose for starters. So mission and vision tend to be about me and my company. They're internal things. They're about how great we want to be. So our mission is to be the best semiconductor company in the world, the best car maker in the world. So missions are very egocentric. They're very internal, if you like. Visions are associated with that in the sense of how do we see the world for our success? So how do we see the world in which we're going to be successful? Purpose is not about that. Purpose is not about us. It's about the outside world. It's about how can we contribute towards the outside world. And in many ways, it's customer centric. For me, the best way to develop a purpose statement is to say, what do you truly enable your customers to do? So not just enable them to drive a car or to get from A to B, but we enable them to do something more than that. We enable them to enjoy the freedom of the countryside. We enable them to accelerate the transition to renewable energy. We enable them to meet their friends, but decide what it is which you enable people to do. And in some way, you add value to their lives. It might seem trivial, like Coca-Cola. It adds happiness to people's lives. Or it might be Walmart, which says we want to reduce the cost of living so people can live a better life. So whatever it is, finding your distinctive way in which you can add value to people's lives, to society, and to the world, the environment in which they live.
Okay, that was very clear. So it's not a fad, it's actually something very different from what we used to talk about. It's less about the direction, it's more about the others and why do we exist, right? And what do we
exist for them? And to be honest, the Simon Sinek Golden Circle, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. If not, it's a 3-minute YouTube video. It's the third most watched YouTube video of all time. 3 circles. It's about why, and then how, and then what. And the why is the most important thing in terms of your business, equally in terms of you. But why, and then how, and then what. So don't jump to product thinking or define yourself by the category you're in. I'm a bank, I do money or whatever. Why do you do that is the much more important thing.
Awesome. Now, I love that explanation. So now that we're clear about exactly what purpose is, let me challenge some of the things you were saying. When you were talking about the 3 phases, right, of this current times and the focus on survival.
Yeah.
Now, if you haven't really thought about the why your business exists and how does it exist to make other people's life better, at a time where, the income is not coming in, the costs are staying, the uncertainty about the future is exponential. Is this really truly a good time to be thinking about your purpose? And what advice would you give to the leaders who may not have thought about that issue before and that are listening to us today?
Well, I think I totally understand the question is this now a good time to be thinking about purpose, or should I just try and survive anyway? What's interesting is that we're more conscious of humanity, people, how do we help people more than ever right now. And if you look at all these companies who are trying to do something to help, which is great, you know, be it in terms of Louis Vuitton making its hand sanitizer, be it Tesla making its ventilators, be it Inditex making its medical protective equipment, then, you know, they're actually becoming more concerned about how do they help? How do they do something for the world? How do they help society? So I think, you know, we're in that moment then where we want to help society, we want to do more for the world, we realize that business needs to do more for the world in very different ways. But I also think that now is the time when we need to make fundamental choices. So being able to make the choices of what do we stop doing and what should we continue to do? What should we accelerate doing? And if you can kind of find things which continue to be good for the world and for those people who you're trying to help right now, if you can continue on that, but if you can get back to business as normal, or if you can even create a better business for the future, then I think that would be fabulous. And I think purpose gives you the guide to find that new direction. It also gives you a bigger space, a bigger space for thinking. So if you take Coca-Cola, for example, are you in the drinks business or are you in the happiness business, for example? And therefore, if you're in the happiness business, what more can you do for people? And that's what Tesla did. When Tesla said, we're in the business of accelerating the transition to renewable energy, are we just in the car business? No. Well, actually, the best thing which we do is we make batteries. So, you know, the gigawatt factories, which we read about across the world, which Tesla have now built, are making batteries for all sorts of devices, be it smart cities or be it in terms of being able to energize our own homes with solar panels on our roofs. And the second largest business which Tesla now has, it actually is solar roof tile business, which are solar devices which are built into the tiles of roofs. And so, you know, it gives you a bigger space to play in. Instead of just thinking I work in a certain sector, or I have to compete directly with those traditional companies who make the same products, I can think in a bigger way as to why I exist. And so it gives you more strategic space to move forwards in.
That's an awesome answer, especially when you're in the survival mode, being able to think beyond, you know, pure survival actually can be very inspirational. But you talked about something that really caught my attention, and that's probably very hard to do. So if you have a purpose, it can help you make better decisions. And there are things right now that we're all figuring out, what do I do more of and what do I do less of? If I remember correctly, in the book that's about to come, that you've written, you were talking about some stats that were very interesting. I think CEOs were in agreement that purpose was a good thing to have, and 90% were, you know, in favor of having a clarity of purpose, and yet only half of them could actually use that purpose in their sort of everyday decision making. Why is that tension? Why is it so hard?
Well, I think there's two reasons. Firstly, the danger with purpose is that we come up with bullshit.
Thank you. It was actually one of the questions on the chat. So let's talk about what is purpose versus what is sort of marketing, or, you know.
Okay. So the danger is that we come up with some abstract, nice words which says that we make the world better, we make people's lives better, and it's not clear. So the real question is, well, tell me more. What is distinctive about your purpose compared to other people's purpose? And I think that kind of pushing people to articulate this purpose in a much clearer way, which is why I think starting with the customer and what do we enable the customer to do is a practical way of starting, and then thinking as an overall organization, what do we do? But being able to be clear enough, specific enough, so that your purpose can't be done by somebody else. So what is the unique reason, if you like, why you exist on planet Earth? What do you uniquely contribute towards the world or society? And so that then, once it becomes clearer, becomes a way of testing a decision. And so, you know, we get out choices, and then we say, which one of these different choices most helps us to move towards that purpose we've now written down. And that's what I mean by, you know, it's effective in decision making. So I think, you know, the two reasons, firstly, is that purpose is not clear enough. Sometimes it can be just a faddish, nice to have words. Secondly, executives don't take it seriously enough. So they themselves think it's something which I just put up there and tick, job done, I can now move on. But if you're serious about purpose, it should guide the decisions you make on the factory floor, it should guide the decisions you make as a salesperson, the decisions you make as a HR director, the decisions you make as a business leader. So it guides the alternatives you have, and therefore the choices which you choose. In the past, we've used finance.
The answer, Peter, and I think an author that I know we both like, Professor Rebecca Henderson, has some really interesting analysis where she actually points out that purpose does actually segment out companies that are, you know, top performers versus average performance in an industry. But purpose and strategic alignment is what actually makes the difference between the top quartile. So it's really being clear about that purpose and really nailing down what does it mean in terms of the strategic decisions one make. And so love the chat, because there's a lot of questions around, does purpose drive success and how do you get there, and how is this not just pure marketing? So that's thank you very much for that clarity. Let me just maybe talk about sort of that clarity of purpose a little bit more. And you know, let's take this hypothetical example where some of our listeners are thinking and starting to process the concept of purpose and starting to thinking about, you know, sort of how might that actually open up new opportunities and new markets for their own business, at the same time that actually, you know, sort of gets them a different sense of why they do things. Now, at this point in time, many of us are faced with, you know, remote working. And I have a hypothesis, but please let me know if you agree with this, that to build that purpose and that sense of purpose in an organization, you sort of need to put it in your culture, not only in your, you know, strategy as we talked about, but also it's part of how you pick people, how you work with people, how do you, and so it's part of the culture eventually. How does one sort of spread that sense of purpose when we're all working remotely, we're all only seeing half of our body and talking to screens all day? How does one really embed that sense of purpose in an organization? Be it because, you know, we're working remotely and that might actually last, it's not only an issue of weeks, right? It might take a little bit longer. Or how does one do that with a very large spread out organization where, you know, it's hard to build a new culture, a sense of purpose? How does one do that?
Okay, so I think a great example is the World Health Organization. And when we were hit with this crisis, it seems a long time ago, but 2 months ago now, the World Health Organization was telling everybody to wash their hands. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was wash your hands, and it was about keep 2 meters, or in some countries 1.5 meters, keep a distance away from other people, and then stay at home. And it realized that it couldn't communicate this message in the same way to everybody. And I noticed one of the participants asked the question, you know, should purpose be imposed, or should it be kind of developed from the bottom up? So I think you do need a coherent sense of purpose across the whole organization. but then it can be manifest, it can be made real in different ways for different people. So I think one of the real things which then with the World Health Organization did, they said, we want anybody anywhere to make their own videos, their own advertising, their own posters of ways in which you can communicate this idea of washing your hands and keeping a safe distance away and staying at home. And people found all sorts of creative ways of communicating, and different ways worked for different people, and different messages, different images, different media work for different people. And so I think the same goes with purpose, particularly in a large organization, finding different ways to communicate, to make real the same broad concept, which is the same idea as values. I mean, organizations have always talked about having values. Again, sometimes they were kind of nice things which people wrote down and nobody took any notice of. But in the best organizations, there were things which had meaning. And if you truly kind of create an organization which wants to have meaning, which wants to have purpose in this case, then people will find, what does that mean for me? What does that mean about the way I serve coffee? What does that mean about the way I clean tables? What does that mean as the way I walk into a sales meeting? And so being able to think about what does this thing mean for you, I think is really important. So it becomes an empowered or a kind of democratic way in which the organization aligns and thrives, but with this common sense. And the key to all of that, the way of giving it alignment, giving it coherence, is leadership. And it means that the leader must be most active in terms of bringing this purpose to life, not just the statement, but telling the stories, giving anecdotes, showing examples of where this purpose has made a difference in practice, and therefore how our business has been more successful, both profitably, but also more successful to the world at the same time.
I like it's an interesting guidance for the leaders in this forum around their invitation to communicate around that. But let's actually take some of the questions here and some of the things I know you care about, right? So the individual, and how does the individual brings himself or herself to work in a holistic way. One of the questions was about, do you first need to find your own purpose first and then sort of align with the one of the corporations? Just curious to know what your perspective is, but I love when, frankly, I've heard you talk about, and when you think about, for example, sort of the program you lead, when you talk about growth of the organization, but growth of the individual as a core part, sort of, as a pillar to the growth of the organization. So they cannot be apart, right? So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a great example of that is last year I spent most of my year working with Microsoft. And I was fortunate to meet many of the people in Microsoft working in Seattle, particularly their headquarters, and Satya Nadella, their CEO. And he's a very different guy from the previous CEO, which was Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer was very much about the kind of the hierarchically driven salesman, product-centered, who wanted to just shift as many products as possible and maximize their sales. And Satya Nadella, he walked into the hot seat and he said, we're going to do things in a different way. And the thing which mattered most to him, as you were kind of talking about, was this idea of personal and business growth being connected. And he used the idea which comes from Carol Dweck, which is called the growth mindset. And the growth mindset is all about saying, how can you grow as an individual and how that can help you to grow as a business collectively. And the big thing about a growth mindset is that you have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to constantly explore new opportunities. You have to experiment. You have to fail. And that's the only way, by learning from those failures, by which you'll move forwards. So being able to combine your personal growth and your organizational growth at the same time is really important. And the same goes for purpose. And I think it's about you're drawing your 3 circles, your why, and then your how, and then your what. Why do you exist? Why do you exist? Maybe now is a good time whilst you're locked down in your house to think about why do you exist? And then how do you want to work? How do you want to work? Do you want to work from home? Do you enjoy this life where you're at home with your family or whatever you do all day, working remotely across the world? Or do you prefer working physically with people doing things? So that's in the how, and then the what. And in a sense, you do have to have your sense of personal purpose beyond the organizations, because most of us will work in multiple organizations throughout our lives. So we'll continue to work for different organizations. But assume, for example, I think the statistic is that if you're under 30 today, you're likely to work in 3 different careers in 7 different organizations, at least as an average over time. And so we need to have something which helps us to choose again, make decisions, choose about what kinds of organizations would we like to and enjoy and fit with. And they're probably the ones which have the best alignment between ourselves as our own purpose and the purpose of them as organizations.
You know what's interesting? Let me share a little story. This reconnecting with why you do things, and again, this is reflection time for everyone, given the situations we're in. One of the things we have put some thought into at IE is how do we support with lifelong learning, and one of the segments that we're working with is people who are who've been leaders in their fields and who are actually at a point where they are, approaching retirement, so to speak. And I do say retirement because it's what society calls retirement, but yet the reality is that they have another 20 years or, and interestingly, we've always associated this concept of purpose, of individual purpose, with younger generations. And you'd be amazed to see how people in their 50s and their 60s are asking themselves the same question around sort of, what do I want to spend my energy on now that I have the freedom to sort of, really pick and choose, because a lot of the things on the to-do list have been done. And so I'm finding through the research we're doing and through this initiative that purpose and the individual purpose becomes a core engine for individuals to actually reimagine, a next professional career. And of course, as you were saying, frankly, a very good guidance, a very good compass to, decide which companies do they want to be associated with.
Yeah, I think just building on that, the book I read some time ago was that little book about the Japanese concept of ikigai. I'm sure you ikigai. And I actually first came across ikigai. It was used in an advertising campaign for Nescafe. And it was a small town in Japan where everybody believed in ikigai, and they lived longer and they lived happier, more meaningful lives because they use this approach to ikigai, which is all about how you align yourself with what you want to do, with what you're good at, and what you can get paid for. The other book, which I read recently, was perhaps linking to what you're saying about older people. It's called The Second Mountain. And The Second Mountain is a book by David Brooks. And the subtitle is The Joy of Giving Yourself Away. So the idea is that in your first career, your main career, if you like, where you get up to the traditional retirement age, you're working hard for the corporation, you're working hard for your family and for yourself to drive progress, to make money, to kind of achieve something. And when you kind of step back and you're more in retirement mode, you're more giving. And actually you find at that point you do better work because you're more in terms of wanting to be with, you contribute towards organizations and towards societies. You may opt to work in a third sector organization, and you achieve more fulfillment at the same time. You give more, so the world gets more, but you also feel more fulfilled at the second time. So, maybe it's worth finding your second mountain before it's too late. So don't wait till you're 60 to find your second mountain, maybe start climbing it earlier.
Totally, totally. That's a great invitation. Let me, I was going through some of the chats. There's, I think we've talked a fair bit about purpose. Let me just make sure that we, make the most of the treat of having you with us and talk about something you know a lot. And there was a question around this on the chat. Is sustainability a must for business? And it's sort of related, but I know you spent a lot of time thinking about this. Is this a must today, or it's yet again sort of another wave that this too shall pass?
It's a must.
Okay.
Full stop. It's a must because business exists within the world. We live in an ecosystem, which is the world. And we need to make sure that the ways in which business lives in that world, be it in the sense of its carbon emissions, or be it in the sense of the ways in which we travel, which we enhance people's lives, whatever we do, we need to make sure that the ultimate net impact of our business is at minimum zero and hopefully positive. So we contribute something to the world. So, this whole idea of sustainability in the sense of social impact or environmental impact, yes, because business cannot be separated from the world in which it lives.
Okay, that's a great answer. I think we kind of covered most of the questions. And you know what, Peter, I'm going to give people 1 more minute in case they want to ask a final question. But the power, I love the power of your messages and what you've taken us through today. And the one thing that I find particularly interesting is of you always is the fact that you bring the globe to the conversation. So it's not only the random American company or the European company. It really, the messages are so true everywhere we look at, right? It's I think you've touched on every continent on the companies you gave us today as an example, which it's one of the treats of actually having you on board and having you part of IE. But let me see if there's any other questions that we and Peter, you see the chat as well. So if there's one that you want to pick up.
Okay. So let's go through some of them really quickly. So what is what is more important, purpose or income? So purpose or profit? The answer is purpose. If you have a clear purpose, you will become more profitable. That's the kind of the cycle by which it works. So start with purpose, profit will follow. What is your belief about being part of an ecosystem? Essential, because you can only work through partnerships today. It's about how you work with others to achieve more in a more sustainable way, which will make you more successful. I'm almost 70 and I will not retire, like Mrs. Lambert. Well done. I love your job. Oh, fantastic. Find your why.
Now, do you want there's one, which countries will benefit from the crisis? You on that one, since I was talking about your global perspective? Wow. I know that's a tricky one, but.
I actually think that this crisis will benefit Asia a lot because they are making the leap towards mass digital adoption much faster than many Western markets. So if you look at both the digital platforms like Good Doctor, which we talked about from Ping An, but also the ecosystem models of Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, then those are the models of the future in many ways. So I think they are making a rapid leap towards what the future markets will look like. So I think they'll benefit quite a lot, and they were doing pretty well anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Well, I think we're going to leave it on that note on how Asia might actually benefit from this crisis. I happen to think that very much starting at the beginning of our conversation, there's crises are an opportunity, and you quoted a number of companies that are actually started, a number of FTSE 100 that actually started in the crisis. So hopefully, once we get out of counting infected people and hopefully bringing under control the major health crisis, hopefully this weeks and months open up new doors for opportunities for many of us. So thank you, Peter, for joining us. Thank you all for spending this afternoon with us. And you can have access to this chat, this dialogue, on the link that was posted on the chat. And we'll be in touch. There's more dialogues happening this week. Please go back to the webpage and you'll see what's on this week. And we still have a few more to come on the upcoming weeks. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.